There we go. Hello, this is the Kubernetes SIG cluster lifecycle meeting for the cluster API provider AWS of the 12th of July 2021. Please be aware that we're abiding by the CNCF code of conduct, which broadly speaking is be excellent to each other. Please use the raise hand function if you want to speak, and we'll get going. So I've got one PSA, which is on the state of E2E. We've got quite a lot of E2E failures at the moment, which is especially making it uncomfortable for me to merge any features at the moment. So I've got a PR that should get it back up and running. I've had to disable some of the tests. We need to put in requests to work testing for working group to get some more AWS accounts and raise service limits so we can run more clusters simultaneously during tests. So we've done some work to parallelize the tests. We now state at the beginning of the test how many resources we're going to use. And if you're running locally, you can kind of run all of the E2E tests in an hour now. It will just spin off 20 Jinko threads and just run all the tests independently if you've got sufficient resources. So there's also some code in there to automatically request more service quota from AWS if you've got permissions to do so. Yeah, so that's why we haven't made a lot of progress on the V1 Alpha full release. So that's where we are at the moment. We'll come back to the board in a moment. Okay, the action items from last week. Affinity control plane 2361. Richard.
Yeah, I keep meaning to look at this. I keep meaning to run a test for obviously when we specify the tolerations for running on the control plane nodes. You know, will that just be ignored for EKS? I keep meaning to do that test and I keep forgetting, to be honest. So I will make sure I run that first thing in the morning and report back on that.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's not going to work. So
no, I think we can use the prefer for scheduling as opposed to required. Maybe.
Yeah, that's true.
But I'll try both. Just to be categorical.
All right, thanks. 2271, which is around sort of the ignition support. Daniel.
Yeah. So I looked at I guess the ignition support needs to happen in core cluster API, and I was looking at that PR and it looked like it was blocked on an end-to-end test, and so yeah, I started or I guess I made a proposal in that issue saying, okay, well, we've got we test the bootstrap. So the core change upstream to support ignition would be to modify the KubeADM bootstrap provider, and so that it can support both Cloud Init and ignition, user data, I guess. And so there's a request before merging that to have an end-to-end test, and the way that the Cloud Init is tested end-to-end is with the Docker provider, and there's an adapter that because there's no Cloud Init running in these images that run in the Docker cluster. So I was thinking, hey, maybe we could write a similar adapter for ignition, and then there would be the end-to-end test. But I'm also, so even if that lands, right, there need to be changes in Kappa to, I guess, store the ignition payload in S3, and there seem to be a lot. There are a lot of different changes. There's a lot of complexity just to add support for Ignition, which is, as far as I understand, just used by Flatcar right now. And I remember that the last time I think we had this conversation, Nadir, you said something about the node attestation proposal, maybe solving this problem in a different way. So I'm actually curious. I don't think I know enough, but I'm wondering if I can, if I can help contribute, to adding Ignition support or Flatcar support, but maybe contribute in a different way than than just pushing these PRs through. Because I'm after looking at them and kind of in depth, I'm questioning whether we want all that complexity just for one operating system. And if there's an alternative, maybe it's worth putting effort there, an alternative solution to modifying the bootstrap provider and all that. But so it's kind of a question. Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, I have a few comments, but I'll let does anyone else want to speak to this first before I fine. Richard.
I guess would this also play into the ticket we've got open to support Bottle Rocket, which will probably require some sort of changes in that area as well.
What does Bottle Rocket actually use for Bootstrap? Does it have anything other than just execute shell?
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head, to be honest. I think it has a similar thing where it has to pull the config down from somewhere, doesn't it? But I really can't remember. But maybe it's worth us investigating that, because that could help or inform the design, couldn't it?
Yeah. Do you mind taking a look?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I need to dig out the relevant proposals. So there's two aspects to this. So one is, so there's two Bootstrap issues in Cluster API today. Oh, I'll let Joe comment first.
No big deal. I was just gonna point out that it's not just a single operating system that's useful for. One of the things that Ignition allows is much bigger payloads than Cloud.net ever could. So if somebody has a need for more than 1K payload, then or is it 1 meg? I forget which. Anyway, whichever it is, this is still going to be useful.
Yeah, that's true. So there's two Bootstrap issues in Cluster API. So the one we're solving in V1 Alpha 4 is node joins. So node joins is, you've already got a running control plane, and I want nodes to join. And today, we generate a Bootstrap token, shove that in user data, encrypted store. Well, it is user data for cabdk, and then a node self-signs a certificate using that token and joins the cluster. This is pretty bad from a security perspective. So this is all kubeadm. So all of this is inherent, because in when you're bootstrapping machine with kubeadm, especially if we're talking about bare metal, there's no controller, there's nothing that can prove the identity of that node. So, and today Cappy is using kubeadm completely. So kubeadm does client-side validation around the node identity. It just checks that there isn't another node already registered by that name before it generates a certificate. That's not a guarantee of security. I could take that token, start a new host, register myself as a control plane host from a kubelet perspective, and get access to all of those secrets. So I can present an arbitrary node with a kubeADM token. We do generate a new token for every machine, but it doesn't block that attack. And for machine pools, the token is reused by multiple machines within that lifetime. So that we don't really have any guarantee of node identity. So the node attestation proposal is based on the GCP cloud provider, and it uses a cloud provider attestation mechanism and appends attestation information to the CSR, and then each provider validates the CSR and issues the cert. So for AWS, we might implement either one of two modes: STS get caller identity. So the host, when each machine comes up, it will synthesize a AWS HMAC signature for STS get caller identity, which is how the AWS IAM authenticator works currently for EKS. And then we shove that information in the CSR, and then Kappa approves the CSR, or we might use the instance identity document. For vSphere, we will use TPM attestation. For bare metal, we've used TPM as well. So the idea is Cappy will have some core components around what the CSR looks like, what X509 extension attributes to use, and then the provider implements the interface, and all these providers will then have like a certificate watcher that will watch new CSRs that come in and sign up. This does not solve, so that solves one set of problems. Solves the other issue is control plane. So today, KCP generates certificate key material and shoves that into user data. Problem we have for EC2 and everyone, and vSphere, is if I have read-only permissions for EC2, I can read the user data, decode the key material, and then privilege escalate onto the cluster, because I can then generate an admin certificate. So we have code, Kappa specific code, that Kappa rewrites the user data for cloud init only, such that it puts the real user data into AWS Secrets Manager or SSM parameter store for AWS secret region, really. And then injects a shell script to download it and give to cloud init. So what we have for ignition support, the PR in Kappa is to provide encryption parity for control plane instantiation, really, is what we're dealing with. So ignition will work without it, technically. Oh, and the other thing we get is ability to go above the 64 kilobyte user data limit, because we don't care what size user data, we carve it on a 60 kilobyte boundary we chunk it up into AWS Secrets Manager and then reconstruct it. So we actually have the ability to go beyond the limit. So Azure doesn't have this code, vSphere doesn't have this code. So in those environments, they actually are hard limited by the size of the user data. AWS Kappa is the only one which has encryption of all of the key material and has the ability to use extended user date limits, and none of the other providers do. So there was a separate proposal about how to deal with this, and we didn't have consensus. Basically, we need to restructure cluster API. We need to untie like the bootstrap mechanism a bit, and maybe consider having some sort of agent, some CAPI agent that lives on a node and is able to pull in a common format for cluster API bootstrapping. So it was roughly allow you to string template whether or not you're using Ignition or Cloud in it. And then there would be an agent that will be pre-installed, maybe through Image Builder, or it's downloaded on the fly, that has just the information for like doing a cluster API bootstrap. And we basically we take on some of those responsibilities that Ignition and Cloud Init have today. But then there were lots of questions of how much of Cloud Init or Ignition do you reinvent then? So that's where we are. Sorry, that was a big dump of information.
Thanks. That helps give some context. So I guess the last part is not totally clear to me, because to me it seems like Ignition and Cloud Init are not right. Ignition is something that needs to be defined pre-machine boot, or something that's executed pre-machine boot, whereas Cloud Init is post-boot. So I'm trying to understand like how the agent like what can you really do with an agent like once the Ignition host is booted, if it's something like Flatcar, where I suppose maybe the assumption is that it's read only file system, so everything needs to be deployed prior to boot as part of Ignition. But maybe I'm misunderstanding that, because I do know that some Flatcar users make, let's say, opt and var read write and sort of deploy software post boot and configure it.
Yeah, so you example would be, I guess you'd have a string template that would look something like, I'm just guessing what the format is. So like,
if it's of interest, I could actually speak to that, since we are using Flatcar and Ignition in production.
okay, yeah, that would be helpful a lot.
So we're not using the cluster API mechanisms for this at the moment. We're using a continuation of a Hungo system that dates back to the CoreOS days. Yeah, in general, we are launching rubber-stamped instances out of an AWS auto-scaling group with static user data per that auto-scaling user group. And then any properties that need to vary sort of machine by machine, we are using something similar to the secrets manager mechanism that Nadir described. We do make opt readable at boot, writable at boot time, and do configure some software within that tree. But in general, we try to keep that as small as possible and just get to the point where we can actually invoke a kubelet as quickly as possible, and then do the rest of the configuration through daemon sets to the extent that we can for functionality that runs on that layer.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I'll just pull up this original proposal, I think. Yeah, so we discussed this many times internally and then had so many iterations. Just waiting for it to load. Okay. So the idea is you'd have a CLI pre-installed on the machine, image builder, or you might pull it in at, if you've got opt writable, you might pull it in at runtime.
Yeah, or if you're following something like the bottle rocket model, then the first thing that happens is that you pull down a privileged init container that lets you do all of the rest of this.
Yeah. And then you'd have basically a config map that you'd string template your actual, like your bootstrap provider. Like, so Cluster API would no longer know about Cloud Init or Ignition or anything. You only need to put in like how to put some configuration that's going to be used by this CLI and how to execute it. And then you provide these config types. So I'd gone for some sort of plugin model. There was a lot of discussion about whether or not that would be appropriate. And one of those core plugins would be kubeadm. So you have some ability to pass options kubeadm. You might add containerd if you're using containerd, some ability to configure containerd, like commonly how to add proxies, remote mirrors, TLS certificates, those kind of things. A controller would then serialize that information. There will be a provider specific implementation that would know where to put that data in a place that's appropriate for that infrastructure. So for AWS, it would still put it into secrets manager. We might put it into S3 or something. And then machine ADM would be the thing that downloads it. So I had written this encryption specification as well. And somebody made a really good point that we can reuse Mozilla's SOPs, I believe.
SOPs.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And SOPs has a lot of this provider specific code in it. So we could just reuse SOPs to do that encryption, pulling down of data. But there are so many concerns around reinventing bits, like where does the boundary begin and end between like what is left to Ignition, what is left to Cloud Init, what is built as part of Cluster API, who looks after each of these plugins, that it was so contentious they didn't go anywhere. So we decided not to pursue it for V1 Alpha 4. But it's still a problem we need to solve. So Cluster API V-Next, if like I can help anyone in what, like I basically need a partner in crime to pursue this and take it forwards, rather than it just being a VMware thing. So
is it a common assumption that guest OSs can sort of pull and run containers as a common mechanism, or is that assuming too much?
I don't know. Maybe not.
Because that provides a, if you can start by delegating all of this stuff to a privileged container that represents any environment specific flavors that you need to have, that solves a whole bunch of these problems.
Yeah, that's I think it's valid. At least it's definitely something to look at. So are there any volunteers who want to take this up as a Cluster API thing? If not, maybe ping me in the cluster. Oh, Richard's nodding his head. So all right. yeah, let's follow up in Slack, I guess, in the cluster and see where we go.
I guess I'm wondering whether pursuing trying to merge the existing ignition PRs is going to make our, like, let's say, work, implementing this proposal or actually getting this proposal through. Is that going to make things harder? Like, do we? I'm a little. Given that KubeADM KubeADM Bootstrap provider right now, right, is sort of like purpose built for cloud init. Adding more complexity to support ignition when we really maybe want to make that Bootstrap provider agnostic. I don't want to make things worse before we can make them better. That's sort of what I'm wondering, like at a high level.
Yeah, I'm pretty certain that was Vince's concerns as well. Vince and Cecile's concerns about merging it in if the long-term plan is to make it agnostic. I think it was a balance around like getting Flatcar working on CAPI versus like pausing any support for Flatcar. Should we defer the rest of this for Slack? Yeah. Joe, you got next one. Cut a 06X release.
Yeah, there's been several bugs that have been fixed. One of them is actually pretty critical for us. It prevents us from being able to bring down clusters if there's too many labels. So yeah, if we could get there hasn't been a patch release since, or bug fix release since May, I believe.
Okay, yeah, let's cut one then. Richard, is there that PR that you did around the subnets? Do we need to backport that one?
Good question. I can't remember. Did I backport the original removal of the slice of structs? I'd have to check that. And if we did, then yeah, we'll have to.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think maybe we didn't. So is that PR only affected when the structs were?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. We might not need to. Yeah, I just wanted to check what else we needed backport before cutting and release. But cutting and release this week sounds good. I'll sort that out. Next one, Richard. Start moving EKS out of it.
Yeah, it's really just I guess a statement really that we're going to start moving the EKS support out of experimental, and as part of that, we're also planning to remove the separate Bootstrap and separate control plane providers and merge those into the main infra provider. So then you don't have to pass all the extra flags to cluster cut or init. We'll probably still keep the feature flag to turn on and off EKS, but have it default to true instead. Another thing I'm going to be doing is removing the. We have an old AWS managed cluster that we no longer reference or use because we use the control plane as the cluster from a CAPI point of view. So we're going to remove the old resource type as well, and I guess at the same time I'm going to use it as an opportunity to restructure the docs. There's been a lot of questions from people new to Kappa about how to do this, how to do that, and actually for someone new, that it's not very intuitive to get up and started. It's like, well, if I need machine pause, I've got to look at this, but it doesn't show me an example with the quick start and stuff like that. So I'm going to try and update the docs to be more intuitive. So there's an issue open for this. So if anyone has any comments, concerns, or other things I should consider as part of that, feel free to comment there or in Slack.
Any questions? It's +1 for me. Anyone got concerns? thoughts? Nope. All right. Sounds good then. Looks like we're good to go. Next one.
Oh, sorry. I think there was a question about machine pools. So in core, moving from experimental or moving out of experimental, and the question was, you know, whether the current implementation is sort of stable, or is there, because I think there's still an issue in core about creating machine objects for machine pool machines. And so maybe this is orthogonal. So does that matter?
Yeah, it's a good it's a good statement. Yeah, so I was going to leave the machine pools in experimental. So AWS machine pool, I'll leave there for that reason, because you asked the question, didn't you, in the CAPI meeting the other week. The AWS managed machine pools, again, both flavors will stay there. Sorry, until that point.
Thanks. Got it.
Yeah, I think there was a action item on Elmico to see if we needed anything for cluster autoscaler, I think, and then that would inform what happens with machine pool. All right, next one, Graceful scale down of machine pools.
Yeah, so this is really just out of a comment that I think it was Dane made a while back in Slack about our machine pool implementation, that actually when it scales down, it doesn't evict the running pods essentially, and just kills the node, and you lose all the work in an ungraceful way. So this is really about essentially implementing some lifecycle hooks and then forcing eviction on the node that is going to be terminated. So really, we've built something that's at Weaveworks for a customer in a slightly contrived scenario where they need like a 2-hour scale down period, but the pattern's been improved. So I was wondering whether that would be a proposal or ADR, or just cut some code. Would someone else like to do it?
I've got no opinions on this personally. Has anyone got any comments?
If not, I'm happy just to do a brain dump actually in the issue, and then see if there's any comments.
Yeah, might as well.
Yeah, and if no one grabs the issue, I'll force someone, or try and force someone at Weaveworks to implement it.
Yeah, it sounds good. Actually, on that note, I've been meaning to add some sort of like kickoff template to the repo as well, so that if people want to pick up issues, they can sort of rally people on Slack, and they can have like a quick call to decide how to proceed, and then get going. And that's then end of the agenda. Is there anything else that anyone wants to discuss? No?
I had a quick question from
Sure.
looking at, I think it was either the agenda or the Alpha v4 description. Are we really using legacy ELBs for the control plane right now for how we admit traffic to the API server?
Yes.
Okay. Have we run into production issues with that under Cluster API?
No, not really. The one that you can't, well, one, which is that if you delete the ELB, there's no real way to recover the cluster, because the DNS name is created randomly, so you've got no control over it. So that is the one production issue.
So
in terms,
oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No, you go ahead.
The production issue that we ran into with ELBs, it was probably 3 or 4 years ago at this point, but apparently it's still a live issue. The KubeGo client that's used in the kubelet can get into a bad state when the TCP connection is dropped without being closed. And that happens on an ELB when AWS rotates the IP addresses that are in use, or the interfaces that are in use by that ELB. And since the kubelet has long-lived TCP connections, on the order of weeks, and AWS only gives you a 6-day grace period between when they update that DNS record and when they finally drop the hammer on the retired IP address. We've seen cases where, well, rather before we switched to NLP, we saw cases where we would see a full availability zone or more drop out as a result of that. And it wouldn't come back online for 15 minutes, because 15 minutes-ish, because that's the lifetime of the TCP retry window. I can send you a link to the upstream issue if that's helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great. In terms of support for NLB, we're trying to, our approach to dealing with this is kind of similar to the conversation around, do we merge ignition support in now or later, or like try and resolve it? There's a effort to bring in a load balancer construct for cluster API in general. And the idea is then you would have pluggable load balancer support. And the NLB will just be another provider. And then you'd reference that in your cluster API resources as being the canonical load balancer for a control plane. That effort's just starting. There's Red Hat folk interesting about that. There's other bits that we're going to enable with that, which is multiple load balancers for each cluster. So you would have an internal load balancer that would serve kubelet, an external publicly facing load balancer for end users or external access, so to cut down on costs, and multi-AZ traffic, things like that. So that's, I don't know what your opinions are on, like, should we add NLB support right now, or should we do this properly as part of the load balancer proposal?
It depends on whether the intent is for people to be using CAPI in production. If it is, then to me, I mean, this was a critical issue for us, and it would be a blocker for us adopting CAPI if we can't ensure that this is solved. So, I don't want to. The whole reason I'm here is because I'm agitating for us to move closer to CAPI internally, but this would be something that would be a blocking issue for us.
Okay, understood. So load NLB support is roughly going to be slated for V1 Alpha 5 because it requires breaking changes to cluster API's contracts. So yeah, so we need to look at the effort of adding NLB support within a V1 Alpha 4 timeframe and like how much complexity that adds, because I'm very cautious to add yet more complexity to AWS cluster controller, since it's our biggest source of bugs. Like the level of conditional statements in that controller is extremely high. Yeah, so my preference would be to unfortunately hold off until we run Alpha 5, where we can do that properly and break out these controllers more.
So I just dropped the link to that into Zoom chat.
Oh, okay. A window I cannot see. Can someone put that into the top? I can't. Where is it? Where's my? There we go. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great. Let's follow up. Maybe open an issue, I think, in the AWS repo, or if there, or comment on the one. There's probably one already there. Let's have a look at the effort. Maybe it's not hard at all. But if it is going to add lots of complexity, I'd rather defer it to load balancer. All right, one more thing. So I think we still got quite a lot of issues open for v70 release blocking. So I think should we go through these now and see where we are? All right, so we've got the consider renaming spec. I think this is more or less done. So I think Ankita was working on that. So I think the PI is ready and it's waiting on, us sorting out the E2E tests before it can get merged, but it looked good to me. AWS resource reference, unimplemented logic. So Marcus did a note of all the bits where we're using an AWS resource reference, but we haven't really implemented it. I know Red Hat submitted a PR to actively block on the AMI, but there is another PR to add the GPU support that actually changes the AWS resource reference to AMI reference, so we can just fix it there. But we should fix this before we run Alpha 4, I think. So, yep. Well, for we run Alpha 4, encrypted value of volume structure be a pointer. So this is to enable you not to have to specify the encryption value if you already, regardless of the AMI. I think that work is done. And again, it just waiting on that. Launch template support was marked as kind release blocking. It was started by Michael Beaumont, who's no longer working on the project anymore. Richard, do you know? Have you got any more context in this one?
Yeah, that really just sort of obviously stalled when Mike left. But then there's been a couple of follow-up meetings, hasn't there, about how we represent launch templates. Yeah. In a Kappa, and then probably I think the last thing was that we're going to have a separate resource, so an AWS launch template. But that's as far as it's gone. Yeah. All right, I'll follow up with Joel on that one. Ability to customize security group rules. I think. I know. So I was going to do this actually, wasn't I? So that's on me. So I'll try and sort that out. Might have to defer that. I think customized security group rules might not be release blocking because it shouldn't be a breaking API change. So I might move this. I might take off that label. And I might change that milestone to V07X. Ability done that. Enhance AMI lookup for EKS, and I think that's so. Sedef is on holiday at the moment, but she has got a sort of proposal, but I'll wait for when she's back to present that. So present that to everyone. But yeah, this should provide the deterministic AMI lookup stuff like that. So clean up AWS templates. That's just simple. That's just a bit. I was going to do that tomorrow. I can do that tomorrow. AWS machine cannot be removed. I think Joel
And I think Joel and Shivani were going to look at, so I'll find out where that is going. Describe NAT gateway section when considered. So actually, I think this one's also not release blocking. It's I'll leave it in the V070 because it is important, but we could potentially defer that. Not require describe NAT gateways. I think again this is in a similar situation. Not an API change. Graduate EKS out of the experimental. I think we do need to put release blocking on this. And EKS controller doesn't. That seems important enough that we should sort out. And is this potentially back portable, Richard?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. Do you think we could do that? We could get it fixed. Oh yeah. So the PR is open. Have you had a chance to look at that one?
I haven't, so I will look at that.
Okay. So maybe if we get this one in, and then we can backport it, and then cut the 06x release, and then that. Is there anything else anyone wants to chat about? If not,
So if you can go back to the previous to that milestone, there was a described NAT gateways issue. I commented on it. I think we want to maybe rename it because the original request was, hey, don't require NAT gateways if you're bringing your own infrastructure. I looked at the code. I don't think it does require it, and I'm pretty sure that we are using Kappa with bring your own infrastructure, and we're not using NAT gateways. But the call to describe NAT gateways is still used. So maybe this issue, my comment was, hey, maybe what the person is asking for is don't require this because it's unnecessary if you're bringing your own infrastructure. Like don't require the permission.
Okay. So I think what we need then, so I don't think it's release blocking, but we have that now, that annotation for externally managed. So you can actually now just blanket turn off AWS cluster reconciliation in V1 Alpha 4, which is technically supported across all the providers for the various infra cluster resources. We probably need to add an option in cluster AWS ADM for externally managed. And then if you have that on, just deletes the unnecessary permissions. So I will take an action item to follow up on that.
Thanks, Cinder.
Yeah. All right, cool. Anything else?
Just one thing, I just added one more item to the 0.70, something Shivani's working on to use the GPU optimized AMIs. It's basically done, it's just waiting on the E2E tests to pass.
Yeah.
That'd be good to get in there.
Okay, great. All right, one more time. Anything else? Going once, going twice, 3 times. All right. See you in 2 weeks, folks.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.